Good afternoon. I'd like to call this special meeting of the Spokane Regional Health District Board of Health to order.
My husband and I were here to discuss our concerns with unvaccinated school-age children potentially being excluded from school due to the recent mumps outbreak. Since the January board meeting, we have been extremely disappointed with how perfectly healthy children are being excluded from school when a majority of the infected have been fully vaccinated for the mumps. In fact, the news reported the third person in Spokane to have the mumps was an elementary school child who had one, not two, but 3 doses of the MMR vaccine. This is the same MMR vaccine that is currently in a lawsuit regarding its ineffectiveness.
So you might find yourself thinking, if these people want to go to school, why don't they just get the shot? We're told that vaccine injury is 1 in a million. Would you be surprised if I told you that, according to the CDC, 1 out of every 1,250 children go to the ER after having seizures after the MMR vaccine? Of the school-age mumps cases to date in Spokane, 182 are vaccinated. Only 5 are exempt, according to the health department. Of the exempt students, 0.24%, or less than 1/4% have gotten mumps, compared to 2% of vaccinated students. They call this vaccine vulnerable, but what they should really call this is vaccine failure. It also makes no sense why current policy would allow a child who is previously unvaccinated with MMR to go out and get the vaccine and go back to school the same day, knowing the science says the antibodies are not raised for 2 weeks.
I am a junior attending Central Valley High School. I have been on exclusion since February 23rd. I have a 3.6 GPA, I'm pretty proud of that, and I'm a generally straight A student. For the lowest grade that I have ever had, it's a B-. Since the exclusion began, I have 2 Fs and a D-. This exclusion has been unfair, and it has taken away from my right to a public education. It is a constitutional right for all students living in this country to have equal educational opportunities. On May 13th, 2011, a state law was passed prohibiting discrimination in Washington public schools based on race, creed, religion, color, national origin, sexual orientation, including gender expression or identity, veteran or military status, the presence of any sensory, mental, or physical disability, or the use of a training dog, guide, or service animal by the person with a disability.
The SRHD is a member in a non-governmental, unelected group called NACCHO, N-A-C-C-H-O. This group has explicit, express adopted policies to support legislation to ban from child care, preschool, and K through 12 any child missing as little as 1 of the 26 injections now required, whether there is an outbreak or not. The policy continues that if they cannot do that, they should discourage exemption use by making exercising or an exemption as difficult as possible, and they specifically list exclusion as a tactic. My children have a constitutional right to an education and a legal right to exempt from any or all of the injections we choose. I am very upset to be forced to conclude that my child's exclusion did not meet any medical necessity, but was used to further the policy objectives of a private group that is not answerable to the citizens of Washington State. This abuse of educational access to advance the NACCHO agenda is appalling.
Exclusion of students due to vaccination status creates division, prejudice, disadvantage. It is also a clear violation of HIPAA, as those around can see who is not in school. We can see with the number of students who became infected with the mumps virus, the vaccination status has absolutely nothing to do with it. When the rights of an individual are stripped to supposedly protect the masses, we have lost the point of everything our forefathers worked for. We are no longer a free society. We are trading the risk of an illness with the risks of the vaccine, and those risks are not rare at all.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think the place to start is to remember that the purpose and the responsibility of this Board of Health is to protect the public health of the citizens of Spokane County as a whole. If you are an individual who is a risk to yourself or others, then it may be a situation where you're not allowed to participate, whether it be in employment or in school, and you can be excluded so that you don't harm someone else.
I am here today to give you an overview of what's going on with mumps in the state. And I am going to begin with a little bit of information about mumps. It was estimated before we had a vaccine that up to 30% of infections were asymptomatic. When we saw mumps during this era, it was usually in unvaccinated people. What we began to see starting in the college outbreaks in the Midwest in 2006, and then these outbreaks that show here subsequently, is we've begun to see mumps in what we call highly vaccinated populations, where most people had the routine evidence of immunity for their status and age. We have 292 folks who know their status, and of those, 92% are up to date. And if you look at how many have each number of doses, we have had only 7 people with 0 doses. We've had 18 people with 1 dose, 292 with 2 doses. We send for sequencing to see where they fall and how they are related to each other. This is very related to the large, in fact, identical to the large outbreak in Arkansas, where they're at nearly 3,000 cases now. It's the same clone that's circulating there that's circulating here. These are all actually the same genotype, which is genotype G.
I'm a family practitioner. I've been that for 25 years, most of it up in Colville, Washington. I've done OB, probably 2,000 deliveries in my life, seen thousands and thousands of patients in my clinic and the hospital. Been an ER physician for 22 years, and been a hospitalist. That's my current job when I'm not doing this, is I'm a hospitalist up in Colville, so I see sick people. You know, I was writing down as frantically as I could everybody's names that were talking, because as you guys were talking, I was going, it's exciting to me to see, I think, is it Madison? Where's Madison? You know, you're a vibrant young lady who's successful, and what I see usually is people have overdosed on drugs your age and are in my ER sicker than a dog, and I'm just going, what's wrong with our country, man? We're just falling apart. And then I see you, and I'm going, that's what it's all about. I mean, your story is one of pain and sorrow, but I'm going, thank God you're healthy, and thank God you're doing as well as you are, and I'm not taking away from what you guys have said. Amber talks about her effect from vaccinations. As a family practitioner, I regularly had to sort through, was a vaccination that caused the problem, or was it an illness that was separate from that, a viral illness, or we just don't know. And to be honest, after 25 years, I just don't know. I think if I had to use my experience as far as vaccination-related illness, I probably haven't seen that much. But the second question would be, did I know what I was looking for? So, I mean, there's all those questions I have as I'm listening to you guys, because this isn't going to get better. I mean, we're talking mumps right now. We had an Ebola, just go by us, and you guys, well, that wasn't even close. Well, in Colville, in Republic, we have a thing called Kinross Mine that sends all their people down to Africa, and guess where they were coming back to? My point being is this is going to get worse. I'm not a naysayer, and I'm not the sky is falling type person, but there's going to be worse bugs that are going to show up from different countries because we're so mobile right now. So I guess in summary, as I go about my job every day, I have to think the worst and hope for the best. And so we have to presume that somebody is going to get really sick and die. And these are seemingly benign infections. Mumps is not an exception, by the way. One of my nurses who worked down, I think, in Yakima, had one of her secretaries who was 42, I believe, ended up with mumps and died of encephalitis from that. You can get deafness from it. You can get orchitis. Fortunately, it doesn't cause sterility. But I mean, there's some bad things that can happen, and we saw some of that while we were here. Up in the Whitworth, I think somebody got orchitis up there, and somebody else thought they were deaf, but never did hear the end of that. But my job is to look out for the vulnerable, the poor, the sick, and the orphans and the widows. The problem is we don't know who's vulnerable. I have another friend whose son has cystic fibrosis and they didn't know it. And the kid ended up at school, got a benign flu bug, and just about killed him, and that's the way they'd made the diagnosis. But I mean, this was a kid who didn't know he was sick and was vulnerable and ended up getting sick because somebody else didn't know they were sick. And you guys need to know that if you read the authority that I have as a health officer, it's kind of scary. I actually have authority over the Attorney General if in case of a major outbreak or I want you to know, even though I'm the interim health officer, I think it's probably the feeling of any health officer, that is a huge burden.
First of all, thank you for sharing your heart, because I was scared to death when Michelle shared with me that you have absolute authority in this county. I mean, to put that much power in one man is always frightening. It seems like you do a good job of trying to balance it, so I appreciate that. But as Mr. Hafner stated, I will be working on changing that, because I believe that you should present your feelings to a board, and the board should then enact the decision rather than having you unilaterally say that. And that's neither here nor there, and nothing to do with you. I feel the proper use of a health board would be to have the experts, you guys, to present to the board what the proper action should be. I think there are so many times when government especially has unintended consequences, and you admitted them today. You know, you didn't realize about these kids that are being excluded, and I honestly didn't have any idea what was going on. I mean, I read the news and saw the reports from the health board, but it wasn't until the moms brought it up at a meeting, you know, that I was like, whoa, this is more than just excluding. And the other point that I see is, as a health board, it's been explained to me several times that health is three things, basically. It's physical, and it's the environment that we live in, and the sociology of that environment, too. An exclusion fixes one of those, but causes two to be an issue. So these kids are being excluded. They're not socially allowed to do the things that they're supposed to. Nobody thought it was going to be as big as I think it's turned out to be, or has gone as long as it has. So to me, it's another one of those unintended consequences. So I'm probably the reason that we're all here today, and I thank everybody for coming again, because last meeting I wanted to do something about it and was told that we couldn't. But I would really hope that we can maybe, at the bare minimum, change it from a mandatory exclusion to a voluntary exclusion, because at the mandatory level, you don't have a choice. At the voluntary level, some parents that don't vaccinate don't want their kids exposed to mumps, and so then they can legally pull those kids out. I know some parents that want their kids to have the mumps because then they're immune for life, you know. It's a personal choice. Your guys' viewpoint is that they're going to spread the virus much more rapidly than the vaccinated. And I get the logic behind that. If they can catch the virus quicker, easier, because they have zero, you know, antibodies, whatever. But I don't think that the stats are backing that up. Now, I agree with you when you said that, well, maybe there's only 7 unvaccinated kids because we're excluding them before the outbreak, you know, really gets bad. So they're sheltered much more, but most of these kids are still hanging out after school, going to Patterson's, doing different things like that. So it's not like by us excluding them or you excluding them from school, you're stopping the problem. You're just stopping one location that there could be a problem. So, you know, I brought up a waiver that people could sign, and I know that doesn't protect the parents of the vaccinated kids that may come down with it because they got it from an unvaccinated kid. But I don't really think that I haven't seen any logic that the unvaccinated kids are going to be a wildfire in the schools, because it's just jumping from vaccinated to vaccinated, because vaccines aren't 100% effective. So that's my hope, is that maybe we can at least get it to a voluntary exclusion rather than a mandatory, something along those lines.
We've had this conversation before in a very similar setting and decided up at our own board level in Colville that it wasn't going to be practical, and there's a whole bunch of arguments for and against it, and I'd be happy to have that with you.
Okay, so even if as a board we came up with a resolution encouraging you to do so, it'd hold no sway?
Always hold sway. We always have to have the discussion.
Sure.
I don't know everything. And
Right.
you guys obviously recognize that when I stood up there. I don't know everything, I don't claim to. So I would be more than happy if somebody knows more and has good ideas, whether it's a parent in the audience or if it's you. I think we need to entertain that, but we need to do it in a way that's going to be reasonable and practical. So.
Okay, well, thank you for your time, and
You bet.